I woke up that February morning to the sound of my neighbor's snow blower already roaring outside. And when I checked my phone, the weather alert told me we were getting hammered with another 18 inches before noon. The blizzard had started around 3 in the morning, and I'd been smart enough to get up at 5 to clear my driveway before the real accumulation hit. My truck sat warm and ready in the garage, my plow attachment already mounted, and I'd spent a good 90 minutes making sure every inch of my property was clear and accessible. Living in Buffalo, New York, you learned quickly that staying ahead of the snow was the difference between making it to work and being trapped for days. I stood at my kitchen window, coffee in hand, watching the white curtain of snow continue to fall across our subdivision. The development, called Meadowbrook Heights, sat about 15 miles outside downtown Buffalo, and it came with all the usual suburban amenities. Manicured lawns in summer, strict architectural guidelines, and an HOA that thought it ran a military installation instead of a neighborhood of 40 homes. I'd lived here for 3 years, and in that time, I'd learned to keep my head down and follow the rules, even the stupid ones. My name is Xavier Donnelly, and I'm a mechanical engineer at a manufacturing plant that makes industrial equipment. I'm 34, single, and I'd bought this house thinking it would be a good investment. The place itself was great, a nice 3-bedroom colonial with a 2-car garage and a backyard that backed up to a small wooded area. It was the HOA that made life interesting, and by interesting, I mean occasionally infuriating. The president of our HOA was a woman named Karren Rutherford, which was almost too perfect to be true. She was 52 years old, divorced, and had apparently decided that micromanaging the neighborhood was her calling in life. She had that classic Karren haircut, the asymmetrical bob that was longer in front than in back, highlighted with blonde streaks that looked slightly orange in certain light. She drove a white Lexus SUV and wore those expensive athletic clothes that women wear when they want to look like they work out but mostly just go to Starbucks. I'd had a few run-ins with Karren over the years. She'd cited me for having my garbage cans visible from the street on a non-collection day, even though it was the day before collection, and I'd put them out at 8 in the evening instead of waiting until morning. She'd sent me a violation notice because my front door wreath was the wrong shade of green according to the HOA's seasonal decoration guidelines. She'd even tried to fine me for parking my work truck in my driveway overnight, claiming it was a commercial vehicle, until I showed her the specific HOA bylaw that said personal trucks under 3/4 ton were permitted. But that morning, as I watched the snow continue to pile up, I thought I was in the clear. I'd already done my driveway. I'd salted it too, using the proper calcium chloride blend that worked even in sub-zero temperatures. My walkway was clear. My front steps were clean. There was nothing for Karren to complain about. I should have known better. At around 9 in the morning, I was getting ready for a shower when I heard a vehicle pull into my driveway. I looked out the bathroom window and saw Karren's white Lexus, and my stomach immediately sank. She was wearing a bright pink parka and white snow pants, and she was dragging something out of the back of her SUV. It took me a second to realize it was a commercial-grade salt spreader, the kind that held about 50 pounds of salt and had a hand crank to distribute it. I quickly threw on jeans and a hoodie and headed downstairs. By the time I got my boots on and opened the front door, Karren was already halfway up my driveway, cranking that spreader and leaving a trail of white salt crystals across the clean, dark asphalt I'd already cleared and treated. "Karren, what are you doing?" I called out, stepping onto my front porch. She looked up at me, and her expression was that particular mix of self-righteousness and condescension that I'd come to recognize. I'm salting your driveway, Xavier. The HOA received a complaint about your property not being properly maintained during this winter weather event. I walked down my front steps, feeling the crunch of salt under my boots. Karren, I already plowed my driveway. At 5 this morning. I salted it too. Look, you can see where I pushed all the snow to the sides. She stopped cranking the spreader and put her hands on her hips. Well, I didn't see any evidence of that when I drove by at 8:30. Because it was still snowing, I said, trying to keep my voice level. But the driveway was clear. I used my plow attachment and then spread salt. You're actually creating a problem because now there's too much salt, and when this melts, it's going to damage my concrete edges. Her face started to turn red, which was impressive considering how cold it was outside. The wind was picking up, and the snow was coming down even harder. Are you seriously going to stand there and tell me that you know more about snow management than I do? I've lived in Buffalo for 30 years. I've been on this HOA board for 8 years. I think I know what proper winter maintenance looks like. I'm sure you do, I said, but I'm telling you I already took care of my property. You didn't need to do this. She started cranking the spreader again, moving further up my driveway. The HOA has a responsibility to ensure that all properties meet minimum safety standards during severe weather. If you had properly maintained your driveway, I wouldn't need to be out here in a blizzard doing your work for you. I felt my jaw clench. You're not listening. I already plowed it. I already salted it. What you're doing right now is trespassing and property damage. That's when she lost it. Karren stopped moving, dropped the handle of the spreader and started screaming. Actually screaming. How dare you? How dare you accuse me of trespassing when I am performing my duties as HOA president? I am out here in dangerous conditions trying to keep this neighborhood safe, and you're going to stand there and threaten me. This is unbelievable. This is exactly the kind of attitude that makes this neighborhood impossible to manage. Her voice was so loud that I saw curtains moving in the house across the street. My neighbor to the left, an older guy named Doug Palmer, opened his front door and stood there watching. The snow was swirling around us, and Karren's face had gone from red to almost purple. I'm not threatening you, I said, raising my voice to be heard over the wind and her continued yelling. I'm asking you to leave my property because I've already taken care of it. You have not taken care of it, she shrieked. Your driveway was covered in snow when I came by. I saw it with my own eyes. Are you calling me a liar? I'm saying you're wrong, I said. It was snowing heavily. Maybe from the street it looked like my driveway wasn't clear, but it was. I spent 90 minutes on it this morning. She bent down, grabbed a handful of snow from the pile I'd pushed to the side of the driveway and threw it at me. It hit my chest and exploded into powder. This is evidence. This is the snow that should have been cleared. You're lying, and I'm going to write you up for this. I brushed the snow off my hoodie and took a deep breath. Karren, you need to leave my property right now. You're not being rational. I am perfectly rational, she was still screaming. Doug had now been joined by his wife, Martha, and they were both standing on their porch watching this spectacle. You men are all the same. You think you can just ignore the rules and do whatever you want, and when someone tries to hold you accountable, you call them crazy. I didn't call you crazy, I said. I said you're not being rational. There's a difference, and I'm asking you one more time to please leave my property. She grabbed the spreader handle again and started cranking it furiously, dumping even more salt on my driveway. I will leave when I am finished ensuring this property meets HOA standards. You will receive a formal violation notice for confrontational behavior toward a board member, failure to properly maintain your property during winter weather, and creating a hostile environment. I pulled out my phone and opened the camera app. "I'm recording this. You're trespassing on my property after I've asked you to leave multiple times. You're also damaging my property with excessive salt application." That made her even angrier. She abandoned the spreader entirely and marched toward me, getting right in my face. "You will not intimidate me with your phone. I know my rights. I am performing my official HOA duties and you cannot stop me." The wind chose that moment to gust hard enough that we both had to lean into it. The snow was coming down so thick that I could barely see the street anymore. This was getting dangerous, and not just because of Karren's behavior. This was the kind of blizzard where visibility dropped to nothing and people got stranded in their cars 50 feet from their own houses. "This is ridiculous," I said. "There's a blizzard happening. We both need to get inside." "I need to finish this job," she said, but some of the energy had gone out of her voice. She was shivering now, and I realized she'd been out here longer than was safe. Her cheeks were bright red from the cold, and despite her expensive winter gear, she looked miserable. "Karren, seriously, go home. We can deal with this later when the weather clears." She looked at me with an expression that I couldn't quite read. For a second, I thought she might actually listen. Then she said, "Fine. But you haven't heard the last of this. I'm calling an emergency HOA meeting about your behavior." She trudged back to her Lexus, leaving the salt spreader in the middle of my driveway. I watched her drive away, her taillights disappearing into the white curtain of snow within seconds. Then I looked down at my driveway, now covered with enough salt to de-ice a small airport runway, and wondered what fresh hell Karren was going to bring down on me. Doug called over from his porch. "You okay, Xavier?" "Yeah," I called back. "Just another day in Meadowbrook Heights." He shook his head and went back inside. I grabbed the abandoned salt spreader and wheeled it into my garage, figuring I'd return it to Karren when this storm passed. Then I went back to survey the damage. My driveway, which had been perfectly maintained, now had salt piled so thick in places that it looked like someone had dumped a bag of rice. The concentration was definitely high enough to cause concrete damage over time, especially at the expansion joints where my asphalt met the concrete apron of my garage. I spent the next hour using a push broom to sweep up the excess salt, collecting it in a bucket so I could at least reduce the concentration. The snow kept falling, and I had to plow again around noon, and then again at 3 in the afternoon. By the time the storm finally started to let up around 6 in the evening, Buffalo had received 22 inches of snow, and I was exhausted from keeping my property clear. That evening, after a hot shower and some dinner, I checked my email and found exactly what I'd been expecting. Karren had sent a formal violation notice to me, and I noticed from the CC list, to every other member of the HOA board. The email was a masterpiece of exaggeration and selective memory. The subject line read, "Emergency Notice of Violation, 47 Brookside Drive." The body of the email started with, "To the board and homeowner Xavier Donnelly. This communication serves as formal notice that the property at 47 Brookside Drive was found to be in violation of HOA covenants, conditions, and restrictions, CCRs, on February 15, 2025, during a severe winter weather event. Specifically, the property owner failed to maintain his driveway and walkways in a safe and accessible condition, as required by Section 7.3 of our bylaws. When the HOA president arrived to provide emergency assistance in ensuring the property met minimum safety standards, the homeowner became verbally aggressive and confrontational, creating a hostile environment and interfering with official HOA duties. The homeowner also made false accusations of trespassing and threatened legal action. This behavior is unacceptable and violates Section 12.1 regarding member conduct toward board members. The homeowner is hereby fined $500 for the property maintenance violation and an additional $500 for hostile behavior toward a board member. Payment is due within 30 days. An emergency board meeting will be convened to discuss further disciplinary action, including possible additional fines and consideration of placing a lien on the property if payment is not received. I read it 3 times, feeling my blood pressure rise with each pass. The whole thing was complete fiction. I'd maintained my property perfectly. I hadn't been verbally aggressive, though I'd certainly been firm in asking her to leave. And the idea that I'd created a hostile environment when she was the one who'd been screaming and throwing snow at me was absolutely absurd. I immediately started typing a response, then stopped. I knew from previous experience that arguing via email with Karren never went well. She'd twist everything I said and use it as further evidence of whatever narrative she was constructing. Instead, I took screenshots of everything and then called my neighbor Doug. "Hey, Xavier," he answered. "Hell of a day, huh? You saw what happened this morning, right?" I asked. "Yeah, we both did." Martha couldn't believe it. Karren was completely out of line. "Would you be willing to write a statement about what you saw? I just got a violation notice claiming I was hostile and aggressive, and I need witnesses who saw what actually happened." Doug didn't hesitate. "Absolutely. That woman was screaming at you. You were calm the whole time. I'll write something up and email it to you tonight." I thanked him and hung up, then checked my recording from earlier. The video was pretty good considering the snow and wind. You could clearly hear Karren screaming at me and see her throw the snow. You could also hear me repeatedly asking her to leave in a calm voice. It wasn't perfect evidence, but it was something. The next morning, the sun came out and Buffalo began the massive job of digging out from the blizzard. I spent most of the day clearing the new accumulation and helping Doug and Martha with their driveway since Doug had a bad back. Around 2 in the afternoon, I got a call from another HOA board member, a guy named Tim Vasquez who lived at the other end of the development. "Hey, Xavier, it's Tim. Listen, I got Karren's email about yesterday and I wanted to give you a heads up. She's calling an emergency meeting for Thursday night. She wants to discuss your violations and potentially increase the fines." "Tim, I didn't violate anything," I said. "I plowed and salted my driveway before she ever showed up. She decided she didn't believe me and started dumping salt all over my property after I asked her to leave." There was a pause. "You got any proof of that?" "I've got video of her screaming at me and refusing to leave. I've got a neighbor who will testify that I was calm and she was out of control. And I've got my truck's GPS data that shows I was using the plow attachment at 5 in the morning, 3 hours before she claims my driveway wasn't maintained." "Send me all of that," Tim said. "Because between you and me, Karren's been getting worse over the past year. This isn't the first time she's gone after someone like this. We had a similar situation last fall with the Johnsons over their lawn maintenance. She ended up backing down when they threatened legal action, but it was ugly." I spent the rest of the afternoon compiling my evidence. I pulled the GPS data from my truck, which showed the timestamps and locations of when I'd been plowing. I edited the video to cut out the parts that were just snow and wind, focusing on Karren's screaming and my calm responses. I got Doug's written statement, which was detailed and damning for Karren. And I wrote my own account of what had happened, sticking strictly to facts and avoiding any editorializing. Then, I did something I'd been considering for a while. I called a lawyer who specialized in HOA disputes. His name was Richard Morgan. And he'd been recommended to me by a coworker who'd had his own HOA nightmare a few years back. "Mr. Donnelly," Richard said after I'd explained the situation, "you're describing harassment and trespassing, possibly property damage depending on what that excess salt does to your concrete. The good news is you have evidence. The bad news is fighting an HOA is expensive and time-consuming." "What are my options?" I asked. "Well, you can pay the fines to make it go away, but that sets a precedent that she can do this again. You can fight it internally through the HOA's dispute resolution process, but given that she's the president, that's a rigged game. Or you can lawyer up and make it clear you're not going to be pushed around. That usually works, but it costs money upfront. What would you charge for representing me at this emergency meeting?" "My hourly rate is $300, and I'd want a retainer of $1,500 to start. For that, I'd review all your documents, attend the meeting with you, and send a formal legal response to the violation notice. If it escalates beyond that, we'd discuss additional fees." I thought about it for maybe 10 seconds. "Let's do it." We spent the next hour going over everything. Richard was thorough and smart, and by the end of the call, I felt a lot better about the whole situation. He had me send him all my evidence, and he said he'd prepare a response letter and a presentation for the meeting. Thursday night came, and the meeting was held at Karren's house, which should have been the first red flag that this wasn't going to be a fair process. The HOA bylaws said meetings could be held at any board member's home, but in practice, it meant Karren got to control the environment. I showed up at 7 in the evening with Richard. Karren answered the door, and her expression when she saw I'd brought a lawyer was priceless. Her mouth actually dropped open. "What is this?" she demanded. "This is my legal representation," I said. "Richard Morgan. He's here to ensure my rights are protected during these proceedings. You can't bring a lawyer to an HOA meeting." Richard smiled politely. "Actually, Mrs. Rutherford, there's nothing in your bylaws that prohibits homeowners from having legal representation at board meetings." I reviewed them thoroughly. "May we come in?" She looked like she wanted to slam the door in our faces, but Tim Vasquez appeared behind her. "Let them in, Karren. This is still a meeting and Xavier has a right to attend." The meeting was in Karren's formal dining room, which had been set up like a courtroom. She sat at the head of the table with the other 3 board members arranged on either side. There were 2 chairs facing them, clearly meant for me to sit alone like I was on trial. Richard smoothly pulled over a 3rd chair from the corner of the room, and we both sat down. The other board members besides Tim were a woman named Patricia Holmes, who was in her 60s and mostly just went along with whatever Karren wanted, and a younger guy named Marcus Webb, who was a dentist and usually stayed quiet during meetings. Karren cleared her throat and pulled out a stack of papers. "This emergency meeting of the Meadowbrook Heights HOA board has been convened to address serious violations by the homeowner at 47 Brookside Drive, Xavier Donnelly. Mr. Donnelly has been charged with failure to maintain his property during a severe weather event and with hostile and aggressive behavior toward a board member performing her official duties." Richard held up a hand. "Before we go any further, I need to state for the record that my client disputes these charges entirely. Furthermore, we have significant concerns about the conduct of the HOA president during the incident in question. If we could start by viewing the video evidence, I think it will become clear that these charges are without merit." Karren's face went red. "We don't need to see any video. I was there. I know what happened." "Actually," Tim said, "I think we should see it. That's why we're here, right?" "To get the full story," Marcus nodded. "Yeah, I'd like to see what happened." I pulled out my laptop and set it up, then played the video. The room was completely silent as everyone watched Karren screaming at me, throwing snow and refusing to leave my property despite my repeated calm requests. When it ended, nobody said anything for a long moment. Finally, Patricia spoke. "Karren, you were screaming at him." "Because he was being disrespectful and refusing to let me do my job," Karren shot back. Richard pulled out his own laptop. "I'd like to present additional evidence." First, GPS data from Mr. Donnelly's truck showing that he was actively plowing his driveway starting at 5:04 in the morning on February 15th. More than 3 hours before Mrs. Rutherford claims the property was not maintained. Second, a written statement from Douglas Palmer, who resides at 43 Brookside Drive, directly across from my client. Mr. Palmer states that he observed the entire interaction and that Mr. Donnelly was calm and professional while Mrs. Rutherford was, and I quote, "screaming like a banshee and acting completely unhinged." Karren stood up so fast her chair fell backward. "This is a setup. You're all ganging up on me. I was trying to help the neighborhood and this is the thanks I get." "Karren, sit down," Tim said firmly. "We need to discuss this rationally." "Rational? You want rational? I have been breaking my back for this HOA for 8 years. I put in hours and hours of unpaid work trying to keep this neighborhood beautiful and safe, and the second I try to hold someone accountable, everyone turns on me." Richard spoke calmly. "Mrs. Rutherford, my client isn't trying to attack you personally. However, the evidence clearly shows that he maintained his property appropriately, and that you trespassed on his property after being asked to leave. You then filed false charges against him in what appears to be retaliation for him standing up for himself. That's a serious matter. False charges. How dare you?" Karren was vibrating with rage. "I know what I saw. His driveway was not properly maintained." I finally spoke up. "Karren, it was snowing. Visibility was terrible. Maybe from the street it looked like my driveway wasn't clear, but it was. I understand you thought you were helping, but when I told you I'd already done it, you should have believed me and left." "Why should I believe you when I could see with my own eyes that you were lying?" Tim rubbed his face. "Karren, the GPS data doesn't lie. He was plowing. You made a mistake." "I did not make a mistake." Richard pulled out another document. "I've prepared a formal response to the violation notice. In summary, my client demands that all charges be dropped immediately and that he receive a written apology from the HOA president. Furthermore, if these charges are not dropped, we will pursue legal action for harassment, trespassing, and defamation. We'll also file a complaint with the state HOA Oversight Board regarding Mrs. Rutherford's conduct." Patricia looked nervous. "Can he do that?" "Yes," Richard said. "He absolutely can, and given the evidence, I'm confident we'd prevail. The question is whether this board wants to spend HOA funds defending an indefensible position, or whether we can resolve this matter reasonably tonight." Marcus leaned forward. "I think we should drop the charges. This is pretty clear-cut." "Karren, I know you work hard for the HOA, but in this case, you got it wrong." "I did not get it wrong." Karren's voice was reaching that screaming pitch again. "You're all taking his side because he brought a lawyer and threatened you. This is exactly what's wrong with this neighborhood." "Nobody respects authority anymore," Tim stood up. "Karren, I'm calling for a vote. All in favor of dropping the charges against Xavier Donnelly and rescinding the fines, say aye." "Aye," Tim said. "Aye," Marcus said. Patricia hesitated, then quietly said, "Aye." "The motion passes 3-1, Tim said. "Xavier, the charges are dropped and the fines are rescinded. On behalf of the board, I apologize for this situation." Karren grabbed her papers and threw them across the table. Several sheets fluttered to the floor. "Fine. You want to let him get away with this? Fine. but I'm not apologizing for doing my job. And if you think I'm going to continue serving on this board when you won't support me, you're wrong. I quit." She stormed out of the dining room. We heard a door slam somewhere in the house, and then there was just awkward silence. Patricia stood up. "I should probably go check on her." "Give her a minute," Tim said. "She needs to cool down." "Xavier, again, I'm sorry about all this. We'll send you a formal letter confirming that the charges have been dropped." Richard nodded. "We'll also need that written apology from Mrs. Rutherford. Given that she just quit, I'm not sure how that's going to work," Marcus said. "The board can apologize on her behalf," Richard said. "That's acceptable." We wrapped up the meeting quickly after that. As Richard and I walked back to our cars in the cold February night, he said, "Well, that went better than expected. Usually these things drag on for months." "Do you think she really quit?" I asked. "Hard to say. People say things in the heat of the moment. But honestly, this board seemed pretty fed up with her. I wouldn't be surprised if they accept her resignation and move on." I thanked Richard and paid his retainer that night via electronic transfer. The whole thing had cost me $1,500, but it was worth it to not have this hanging over my head and to establish that I wasn't going to be pushed around. The formal letter from the HOA board arrived 3 days later, confirming that all charges had been dropped and apologizing for the incident. There was no mention of Karren or her resignation. I filed it away and figured the whole thing was over. I should have known better. 2 weeks later, I was coming home from work when I noticed something weird about my mailbox. The door was hanging open and there was liquid dripping from inside. I pulled over and got out to investigate, and the smell hit me immediately. Someone had poured old milk into my mailbox. The mail inside was soaked and ruined, and the smell was absolutely revolting. I immediately thought of Karren, but I had no proof. I cleaned out the mailbox, filed a report with the post office since tampering with mail is a federal crime, and installed a security camera aimed at my mailbox the next day. 3 days after that, the camera caught her. At 2 in the morning, Karren's white Lexus pulled up to my mailbox. She got out, poured something from a plastic jug into my mailbox, and drove away. The camera got a clear shot of her face and her license plate. I called the police the next morning and filed a report. The responding officer, a tired-looking guy named Officer Stevens, took my statement and reviewed the video. "Yeah, that's pretty clear," he said. "Tampering with mailboxes is federal, but we'll start with local charges. Vandalism and harassment. You want to press charges?" "Absolutely," I said. Officer Stevens nodded. "I'll get this over to the prosecutor's office. Someone will be in touch." What I didn't expect was what the postal inspector found when they got involved. Apparently, once federal authorities started looking into Karren, they discovered she'd been doing similar things to other people in the neighborhood. The Johnsons, the family who'd had the dispute with her about lawn maintenance, had also reported mail tampering but hadn't had evidence. A single woman named Lisa Park at the end of the street had reported harassment and vandalism over the past 6 months, including sugar in her gas tank and spray paint on her fence. The postal inspector, a stern woman named Agent Reynolds, called me in for an interview. "Mr. Donnelly, your video evidence is excellent. We're building a case against Mrs. Rutherford for multiple federal violations. I need to ask, has she engaged in any other behavior that might be relevant?" I told her about the driveway incident, the false violation notices, everything. Agent Reynolds took detailed notes and said they'd be in touch. 2 days later, I was working in my home office when I heard sirens outside. I looked out the window and saw 3 police cars and an unmarked sedan pull up to Karren's house, which was about 6 houses down from mine on the opposite side of the street. I grabbed my coat and walked down, joining the small crowd of neighbors who'd gathered at a respectful distance. We watched as officers led Karren out of her house in handcuffs. She was wearing yoga pants and a fleece jacket, and her face was red and streaked with tears. She was shouting something about persecution and illegal searches, but the officers weren't listening. They put her in the back of one of the police cars and drove away. Lisa Park was standing next to me. "Is this about the mail tampering?" "Yeah," I said, "and probably other stuff too." "Good," she said quietly. "She made my life hell for months." I was actually thinking about selling my house just to get away from her. Over the next week, the story came out through the neighborhood grapevine and some local news coverage. Karren had been charged with 6 federal counts of mail tampering, multiple counts of vandalism, harassment, and stalking. When police searched her house, they found evidence connecting her to vandalism at 4 different properties in the neighborhood, including photographs she'd taken of people's homes with notes about violations she planned to cite them for. They also found a disturbing amount of information she'd compiled on various neighbors, including financial records she'd obtained through questionable means and personal details that she had no legitimate reason to have. The most disturbing discovery was a notebook where she'd written detailed plans for dealing with neighbors she perceived as problems. The entry about me included notes about my work schedule when I left for the gym, and ideas for making my life difficult, including salt damage to concrete, violation notices until he sells, and find out if he has any secrets. The prosecutor I spoke with, a sharp woman named Amanda Chen, told me that Karren was likely looking at serious prison time. The federal mail charges alone carry up to 3 years per count. Add in the stalking and harassment charges, and she could be looking at a decade or more, though she'll probably take a plea deal. "I just don't understand why she went this far," I said. "It was a driveway dispute. Why escalate like this?" Amanda shrugged. "Some people can't handle being challenged. In my experience, people who need that level of control often have something else going on. We found evidence of serious financial problems. She was 3 months behind on her mortgage. I think being HOA president gave her a sense of power and importance that she desperately needed, and when you stood up to her, it threatened that identity." The case moved slowly through the system, as these things do. Karren was released on bail but had to wear an ankle monitor and was prohibited from coming within 500 feet of my house or several other properties in the neighborhood. The HOA, meanwhile, was dealing with its own crisis. Tim Vasquez became acting president, and they had to hire a lawyer to review everything Karren had done over the past few years to make sure there weren't other legal problems lurking. It turned out there were. Karren had been embezzling small amounts of money from the HOA funds for at least 2 years. Nothing huge, usually just a few $100s at a time, but it added up to nearly $12,000. She'd been covering it up by inflating vendor invoices and pocketing the difference. That added another set of criminal charges. The emergency HOA meeting to discuss the situation was packed. Every homeowner in the development showed up, and the mood was angry. People wanted to know how this had happened and why nobody had caught it sooner. Tim, to his credit, didn't make excuses. "The truth is, we trusted Karren too much. She handled most of the financial stuff herself, and the rest of us didn't ask enough questions. That's on us as a board, and we're implementing new policies to make sure it never happens again. We're requiring dual signatures on all checks, quarterly financial reviews by an outside accountant, and we're going to rotate board positions every 2 years, so no one person has too much power." Marcus added, We're also revising the bylaws to limit what the HOA can fine people for. Looking back at the past few years, Karren was using violation notices as a weapon. That's not what an HOA should be. We're supposed to maintain property values and handle common areas, not micromanage everyone's lives. There was a lot of discussion and some heated moments, but overall, the neighborhood seemed ready to move forward. Several people came up to me after the meeting to apologize for not speaking up sooner when they'd seen Karren targeting me. Doug Palmer shook my hand. "You did us all a favor by standing up to her. I'm ashamed I didn't do it myself when I saw her screaming at you that day." "You wrote a statement for me," I said. "That helped a lot. Still, I could have done more. A lot of us could have." The criminal case took 8 months to resolve. Karren eventually pleaded guilty to 3 counts of federal mail tampering, 2 counts of stalking, 4 counts of vandalism, and 1 count of embezzlement. The plea deal got her a sentence of 5 years in federal prison, followed by 3 years of supervised release. She also had to pay restitution to the HOA and to the individual homeowners whose property she damaged, including $2,000 to me for the concrete damage from the excess salt and the cost of the security camera and legal fees. The sentencing hearing was on a warm October morning. I attended along with Lisa Park and the Johnsons. Karren looked much older than she had 9 months earlier. Her hair had gone mostly gray, and she'd lost weight in a way that made her look gaunt rather than healthy. When the judge asked if she wanted to make a statement, she stood and faced us. "I know I can't undo what I did," she said, her voice shaking. "I was in a very dark place mentally and financially, and instead of asking for help, I tried to control everything around me. I convinced myself that I was helping the neighborhood, that I was the only one who cared enough to enforce the rules. But the truth is, I was just taking out my own problems on other people. I'm deeply sorry for the harm I caused, especially to Mr. Donnelly, Miss Park, and the Johnson family. I hope someday you can forgive me, though I know I don't deserve it. It was a good apology, and it might have even been sincere. But it didn't change what she'd done or the months of stress she'd put multiple people through." The judge handed down the sentence, and Karren was led away to begin serving her time. Outside the courthouse, Lisa Park looked relieved. "I can finally relax in my own home," she said. "I'd been having anxiety attacks just checking my mail." "I know what you mean," I said. "It's been exhausting." The neighborhood gradually returned to normal, or at least a new normal. Tim served as HOA president for a year before stepping down, and Marcus took over. The new board was much more low-key and focused on actual community needs rather than petty rule enforcement. They repaved the community entrance, organized a neighborhood watch program that actually made sense, and started a summer concert series in the common area that people actually enjoyed. My life went back to its usual routine. Work, gym, hanging out with friends, dealing with Buffalo winters. I dated a woman named Jennifer for a few months, though that didn't work out. I got a promotion at work. I helped Doug with his driveway every time it snowed more than 6 inches because he still had back problems. The following February, almost exactly a year after the initial incident, Buffalo got another major blizzard. I was up at 5 in the morning again, plowing my driveway in the dark and the swirling snow. When I finished and went inside for coffee, I stood at my kitchen window watching the snow fall, remembering that crazy morning when Karren had shown up with her salt spreader and set off a chain of events that changed the whole neighborhood. My phone buzzed with a text from Tim Vasquez. "Need any help with your driveway? Saw you already got it cleared but wanted to check." I smiled and texted back, "All good, thanks. Let me know if you need help with yours." That was the difference. The new HOA board actually cared about neighbors helping each other rather than catching each other in violations. It was how a neighborhood should work. Later that morning, after the snow had stopped and the sun was coming out, I went outside to clear the new accumulation. Doug was outside too, and we waved at each other. Marcus drove by slowly in his SUV, careful on the snow-packed street, and honked hello. A young couple who'd moved in 3 houses down were building a snowman in their front yard with their toddler. It was peaceful. It was normal. It was everything a neighborhood should be, and hadn't been when Karren was running things like her personal fiefdom. I sometimes wondered how she was doing in prison, whether she'd gotten help for whatever had driven her to such extreme behavior, whether she felt genuine remorse or just regret at getting caught. But mostly, I didn't think about her at all. She'd been a dark chapter in the neighborhood's history, and we'd all moved on. The concrete at the edge of my driveway did need repair that spring, just as I'd predicted. The excess salt had accelerated the deterioration of the expansion joints, and I had to hire a contractor to fix it. The restitution money from Karren covered it, but barely. I kept the receipt and the photos of the damage, just in case there were ever any questions. The HOA drama had taught me some valuable lessons. First, stand up for yourself early before small conflicts escalate into major problems. Second, document everything because you never know when you'll need evidence. Third, having a good lawyer on speed dial is worth every penny. And fourth, neighborhood associations are only as good as the people running them, which is why it's important to pay attention to who's on the board and to vote in HOA elections. I also learned that a lot of my neighbors were good people who'd been too intimidated or too busy to stand up to Karren's bullying. Once someone finally did, they were relieved and supportive. It made me more connected to the neighborhood in a way I hadn't been before. Doug and Martha had me over for dinner once a month. I helped Lisa park when her car battery died in the Target parking lot. The Johnsons invited me to their daughter's high school graduation party. The following year, Marcus asked if I'd consider joining the HOA board. "We need level-headed people who understand what this organization should and shouldn't be," he said. "You proved you can stand up to unreasonable demands, and that's exactly the kind of person we need." I thought about it for a while before agreeing. I didn't want to become what I'd fought against, but I also realized that good people needed to step up and be involved if we wanted to prevent future Karens from taking over. I joined the board and took on the role of treasurer, implementing the financial controls that Tim had promised. It was boring work, mostly just reviewing invoices and maintaining spreadsheets, but it was important. I found 2 billing errors from vendors in my first 6 months. Nothing malicious, just mistakes, but they would have cost the HOA about $800 if nobody had caught them. I also helped negotiate a better rate with our landscaping company and found a more affordable insurance policy that actually had better coverage. The neighborhood thrived without constant violation notices and petty enforcement. People took care of their properties because they took pride in them, not because they were afraid of fines. The few times we did need to address actual problems, like a house that became genuinely overgrown after the owners went through a divorce, we approached it with empathy and offers of help rather than threats and punishment. I stayed on the board for 3 years before stepping down to focus on other things. By then, Meadowbrook Heights had transformed from a place where people lived in fear of their HOA to a place where people actually chose to stay long-term because they liked the community. Several houses sold during those years, and every time, the new owners commented on how friendly and welcoming the neighborhood was. Karren served her full 5 years and was released in the fall of 2030. I heard through the grapevine that she'd moved to Arizona to live with her sister and was working as a hotel housekeeper. I hoped she'd found some peace and learned from her mistakes, but I had no desire to ever interact with her again. Some chapters of life are meant to stay closed. The blizzard anniversary became a weird inside joke in the neighborhood. Every February 15th, someone would post on the neighborhood Facebook group asking if everyone's driveways were properly salted, and we'd all laugh about it. It was a way of acknowledging what had happened while also celebrating how far we'd come. I still lived at 47 Brookside Drive as of 2031, though I'd started thinking about whether it was time to look for something bigger if I ever got serious with someone. The house had been a good investment, appreciating nicely in value, and I had good memories there despite the Karren drama. Most importantly, I'd learned that home isn't just about the structure you live in. It's about the community around you and whether people treat each other with respect and kindness. The last time I plowed my driveway during a blizzard, it was January of 2031. I got up early, cleared everything properly, salted appropriately, and went inside for coffee without anyone screaming at me or questioning my work. It was beautifully, wonderfully boring. And that was exactly how it should be.